Thank you, David. And that was a much longer introduction than I planned to give my panelists. David came to me. He's the TA in my class, and at one of the crazier classes that we had, at the end of it, after 2.5 hours, came to me and said, would you mind doing this? And I I didn't pay much attention. I said, no, it's an innovation panel. It's easy. Why not? I can say some innocuous things about how the world of ecosystem of innovation has changed and is not the prerogative of the large companies and their central R&D organization. It is now distributed over not only the world, but a whole bunch of other players, universities, entrepreneurs, large companies, medium companies, and so on. So I said, easy. And then he sent me the title of this panel, which has something to do with Asian companies out-innovating the rest of the world, which is now controversy, okay? And something that I know very little about. So I'm going to keep very quiet. I'm going to introduce the panel. I think that they're going to provide some very interesting comments for you. And then I'm going to go back to my academic role, which, and my students know, I don't let people just sit in the audience or in the class. So I'm expecting you folks to ask a lot of questions, because otherwise I have some really easy questions that we've been thinking about that I can ask them. It will be very easy for them to answer. But I'd like you to think of some more interesting questions to ask. Okay? So having said that, we're going to go in rapid fire, and I'm going to have one of my bigger challenges here of the panel is to pronounce names. So, so let me start with, on my right, with Christian Koehler, and who is Vice President of Ricardo Strategic Consulting and Managing Director responsible for Asia. And he has focused on growth strategies and organizational transformation in multinational and domestic companies in Asia. So he recently has done extensive work on innovation and product planning strategies for local Chinese companies. And he's familiar, very familiar with that environment. So Christian, the first portion is yours.
Thank you very much, Val, for the kind introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to participate in such a prestigious event. Just very shortly, by way of background, my company, Ricardo, is an engineering company. So we deal with innovation on a daily basis. We are about 2,000 engineers globally, and we work in China since more than 40 years. Since 10 years, we have an engineering center in Shanghai, and I spent the last 6 years of my life working in that engineering center. And our key clients are Chinese companies, so we pretty much work for all the major car makers in the China industry and help them to develop powertrains which are more environmentally friendly than what we see today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what China means and what innovation means in the global car industry. And let me start by saying that there are at least 3 roles that China has to play in the global context for any company these days. First of all, it is the largest global market, so same as you heard from David earlier for PCs, it is the same for cars. It is the most important market by all means, and certainly the fastest growing market on a global scale, so nobody can ignore it. Secondly, and that may be specific to cars, it is a market that has specific product requirements. You cannot just take a car from the United States, a Cadillac, and sell it one-to-one in the Chinese market. That doesn't work because people have specific tastes and they have specific preferences, and they are decidedly different to the ones in the developed world. And thirdly, there is always the big cost advantage that you can have from producing in China, so taking China as an export market is kind of the next frontier in the industry. Right now, there is only one company in the world that does that, which is Honda, who successfully export part of their vehicles from China to Europe in a very special agreement that they have with the local government, but nobody else does it. Part of the reason is, of course, the strong unions in the home countries that prevent that from happening, but economically it will make a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about what that means for innovation. The first aspect is that if China is going to continue growing as it does, by 2020, in a conservative case, 20% of your global car market is in China. If you're more optimistic about it, there is almost no limit to think about it. And in a very simplistic analogy, that would mean that at least 35% or 20 to 35% of your global R&D resources are in China as well. Now, I can tell you that nobody of my customers is even close to that number. And the implications are huge. Val mentioned global innovation networks. China is bound to become, in the car industry, the most important node in the system globally. And there's a big change for all the car makers because they all have their resources somewhere else. So that's one of the first changes that we're facing. The second is the product differences. You can take a car from the United States and modify it very successfully and make it appealing to Chinese tastes. The most successful example is probably Buick, who really reinvented themselves in the Chinese market and are very, very successful. You see two examples here that I brought with me. One is Hyundai, which is the company everybody is nervous about in the global car industry, and they are also very successful in China. And they are very good at modifying their products with very little effort to Chinese tastes. Some examples are more luxurious interiors that appeal more to people who are chauffeur-driven, which is very common in China. More lighter tones in the interior colors, and also generally more chrome and more excessive features in the interior of the cars. That said, you also need to do something for the cars to be able to cope with the Chinese fuel quality, which is very bad, and things like that. So you just cannot take the product as it is, but you need to have a specific product. Thirdly, the important node in the global network, you could easily imagine that China becomes the center globally for any car maker that develops affordable cars. But you may be aware that China is also the biggest luxury car market. So any company that plays in the luxury space, and I'm German from background, so Audi, BMW, and Mercedes are the predominant player next to Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura. They are all making half of their global profits in China these days. And for them, it is the most important market. And there's almost no end to thinking about the possibilities and implications if that continues like it does. So having innovation and specific products in China for these companies is a major consideration these days. And I can tell you that we are talking to these companies on a daily basis about what this means and how they can cope with it. Now, let me conclude by telling you a little bit about what Ricardo has done with all these challenges. In 10 years of operation, we have built up our R&D center in China, and here are the 5 things that we felt were the most important for us, or what we learned along the way. Number 1 is ensuring speed and autonomy. What I mean by that is that the Chinese market is, again, I think David very good, in a very good way illustrated, is very fast changing. And you got to be fast if you want to survive on that market. So it is no appropriate process if you have to ask the global headquarters for any quote that you need to submit to a client in China. That just doesn't work. The client doesn't take you seriously, and the time is way too long anyway. So you need to have people in China locally that can actually make decisions about business-relevant features. Secondly, develop the right products. Again, that hinges on what I explained earlier. You need specific products for the Chinese market. They need to be innovated in a way so that the consumers there can live with it, can accept them. There are certain price expectations, and you need to understand how Chinese customers, and that is not very different, I believe, for private consumers and business consumers, make decisions. And the way they make decisions is decidedly different than I have experienced it prior in the Western world. Thirdly, balancing the resource growth. That is a euphemism for saying struggle to find the right talent. So China is a red-hot job market, and it is very, very difficult for anybody in the market to find the right staff. In particular in the car industry, where we had this tremendous growth over the last decade, you can easily imagine that we could easily absorb any engineer that leaves the universities. And there is a real fight to get the graduates from the top universities among my peers and other companies. One other challenge is that it is very difficult in China to grow fast and make a lot of money, at least in the car industry. It's in other industries that may be different, but in the car industries that is difficult, and it's a continuous struggle for my company. Retain those people once you have them on board is even more difficult in that market. Because what we do, for example, when we hire people, we send them to the UK, which is one of our headquarters, or the United States, in order to expose them to our values, to the way we work. We train them in the procedures that we have. And once they come back, we really want to keep them, because then they really know how to work in our system and are most effective for us. And we do a lot of things in order to keep them. One key element, again, is autonomy. We found that it's very appealing for people to work on really interesting tasks that allows them to stay focused and keeps them on board. Another key area is training, which we're very keen on. And last but not least, and I really look forward to what James has to say later on that, but because we actually engineer stuff, we develop IP. That's in fact our core business. That's what we do. And we do, of course, develop IP for our customers, but we also need to keep our own IP. And we found that it is very difficult to make that work in the Chinese environment. And we have developed quite a number of quite tactical things to enable that, be that to make sure that, for example, in a project that involves, let's say, 50 people, nobody really, no one person has the complete picture of all the IP that is involved in that. That's one tactic that we have. We separate people in offices, we separate the IT networks and all these kind of things. So it is very difficult to make that work. It even gets more difficult once you test the product in the market and try to protect your IP then. That concludes my remarks. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Christian. That's perfect start, because that keeps us in time.